Hi everybody. I want to talk to you for a minute or a couple of minutes about discussion 2. We looked at standards for educational and psychological testing where counselors that are considering using an instrument are now responsible for examining the evidence related to the consequences of testing. And so one of the things that we had to answer this week was, or last week, is how do you understand the statement? And so I think most of you really understood where I was going with that, which is that a test is a test. It's a small picture of a person taken, a snapshot, if you will, over the course of a life. And if you know what a snapshot does, you might have a good snapshot one day and then a terrible snapshot the next day. It really depends on the lighting. It depends on, environment. Who's taking your picture, who's there helping you with the photography. And so you have to think of your test like a snapshot. And so it's really important that counselors evaluate all the evidence. Anything else that they're presented with, which may be previous diagnosis, maybe there's medications, you've got an intake interview that you got a history from, and then you've got the interviews that you are doing, reviewing the intake. And you may be giving an official assessment, and especially if you're doing some sort of diagnosis, because without an assessment, a standardized, reliable, and valid assessment, you really don't have the support or backing for your diagnosis. You really want to be able to put pieces of data together, just like we did in research. You want to be able to put the history together with the formal assessment that you did, with the observations and information that you've gathered from the person and their history. And so you take all of these pieces and put it together to create a very clear picture of what that person is going through at that point in time, whether it be situational or even long-term. And that's something that you will be able to discover through the formal assessment. So why is it important for counselors to really complete the assessment, to really think about the consequences of the assessment? Well, first of all, are you using the right assessment? Are you using a valid and reliable assessment? Reliable is if you gave it several times, will you get the same results? And valid, does it measure what you want it to measure? A few years back, about, 10, 15 years back, the Woodcock-Johnson, which is an intelligence test and an achievement test. Their achievement test claimed to measure reading fluency. Well, reading fluency has several sub kind of content to it. You can't just give one test and have reading fluency. There are several little pieces that you have to break that down into, and the Woodcock-Johnson did not do a good job of that. It only measured several substrands, which did not give you a good overall picture of whether that student was actually learning disabled in the area of reading fluency. And so an additional test had to be given in order to support the original kind of hypothesis that there was a problem in reading fluency whenever that test was given. So that's just an example of how a test may not measure all the components. You may give a test on depression, but it's only going to measure situational depression. It doesn't measure long-term depression. You have to be very careful on what kinds of tests that you are choosing, and that there is some sort of research done on that test. We talked about reliability and validity a little bit in research class. And so we'll go over that a little bit more during residency. But it's important that you take note that you need to have tests that have been proven that they work for the specific thing that you want them to. The social consequence, that's obvious. Stigmatizing a person, if you give a wrongful diagnosis, then that person lives with that. That person moves with that from place to place. I know that I've seen many people that have come and they tell you their diagnosis, and you're like, well, why was that, a diagnosis? One example of that is my nephew. He was diagnosed with bipolar when he was probably 13, and really there's no evidence of that at this point in time. So was it situational? That's a good question. But it's something that's important to be aware of. Did it help him with the diagnosis? The only thing it really helped him do was get medication. So it's a consideration. Do we want to give a label if it doesn't benefit our client in any way, shape, or form? So it's really important that we measure, do the benefits outweigh those negative consequences that we might be putting on a person at that point in time. So anyway, discussion number 2, you guys did a great job, and I can't wait to talk to you more about this kind of information when we all see each other in residency.